Connecting. Let's see if we've got everybody on. Welcome to the stream. This is Squirrel here, working with the Squirrel Squadron, and I see that some of you are arriving, so I'm going to give everybody a minute or two to get on to talk about the exciting topic of doing nothing. That's our goal for today, is to have a good, solid discussion about why doing nothing might be a good idea, why it might be the most helpful for your tech team. So while everybody is joining, I want to say hello first to people who are listening to this on a recording. So not everybody can make it here. I appreciate that. So that's why we record these. They're up on the forum. So if you're looking for one, you have to leave early. That's perfectly fine. Always available recordings, both at the link you're on here for LinkedIn or wherever you are, and also on the Squirrel Squadron forum. So happy to have you live or on recording. As I mentioned, the forum, we've had a good discussion there. I saw somebody just posted there. I didn't get a chance to read that in much detail, so happy to look at that. But we had a couple folks contributing before with new ideas about places they felt might be hard to do nothing. So we're going to deal with that and see if I can answer your questions. While you're listening to me prattle on at the beginning, let people join. Please comment in the chat, whatever chat you're using, wherever you might be. Let me know what areas you find. Same question as in the forum. What areas are you finding it difficult to do nothing? If you're a technical leader, you might say, gosh, I would really like to keep my fingers out of this pie, but man, I really feel like I have to get in here. And any other questions you have, throw them in the chat. I'm very happy to comment and help you with any topic at all. That's why I do this, because this is the Squirrel Squadron. This is where we get together, tech and non-tech people together, solving problems, figuring out what the best approaches are. So that's why I'm here. That's why I get up in the morning. So I'm ready to help you with those things. But you got to tell me something. If nobody tells me anything, that's great, because this will be a shorter recording and I can go walk the dog, who very much needs it. She was ill this morning. So that's all my news for the day. Welcome to folks who are here listening in. Please do make your comments, ask your questions in the chat. I'm watching as best I can. It's half term, so I'm missing Laura, my factotum, who helps make this all run so smoothly. So I hope it all runs. Good stuff. Throw in your questions. I'm going to get going on some of the topics right after I introduce the Squirrel Squadron more properly. I should tell you where you can find it. So if you're interested in being part of it, if I can type. Oh, I've got a sticky key there, not working right. It's squirrelsquadron.com. I'll put that up on the screen in a moment here. If I can do that, there it goes. So head on over there if you're interested in more events like this. There's one of these every week. We have one next week on search engine optimization, why that's good, why it's bad, what you might do about it, how you might make it work. We're going to talk about in 2 weeks, no, 3, we're going to be talking about the training budget, why you shouldn't have one. Don't train your engineers. What does that mean? Why are we skipping training? And I'm also going to be in Miami in person in 2 weeks, I think it is. So I'll be at a happy hour there. So I will not be happy at the happy hour. It's not my favorite kind of place. So come along, meet me if you're in Miami. I would love to talk about all these topics. Great to see you folks there. Thank you. We have a question from Nigel, so I'm going to get to that. But let me get started with the main thrust of today's topic. I just want to give you a couple examples of something called leverage. How do I get this off the screen, by the way? There we go. Something called leverage. And if you're American, you might be used to calling it leverage. But in Britain, we tend to say leverage. Same thing. You get a great big thing, and you stick it underneath your car, and you lean on this end, and you can pick it up. That's how levers work, right? So the problem that we're dealing with today is how tempting it is to get in there and start doing something that is low leverage. And something I'm always coaching CTOs, CEOs, anybody executive on is get your darn fingers out of the pie. Stop intervening. Stop doing quite so much, because you're robbing the people that you work with of learning. And you are not acting with the highest leverage. So that's the main topic. That's the main things we're going to cover here today. And I want to give you a couple examples in my own life of both high and low leverage, places where I was effectively following the advice I'm giving you and not so effectively. Let's start with the not so effective, because that's always fun. Earlier this week, I didn't get an email newsletter. I was expecting to get it. I thought I was going to get it. I was ready to read it. It didn't arrive on the day it was supposed to. And I felt sad about that. And I said, boy, this isn't working so well. And I went and investigated. This was the low leverage part, because I thought, oh, I can look in the email logs. I'll see whether I was actually getting this message. I'll observe whether this email was actually being sent to me. Not the highest use of my time, right? So why is that? Well, the way to measure whether something is high enough leverage or not, is it worth you intervening? Should you put your fingers in that pie? Is this going to benefit more than just you? Is it going to have an effect on multiple people? Will it have a multiplicative effect in the way a lever does, right? You pull down on the lever and it makes your action, your muscle action, that's much multiplied by the length of the lever. Is that what's happening? That wasn't what was happening with my email investigation. It was affecting me and whether I was getting this particular email and whether there was some fault with my email server. And it satisfied my interest. I was really curious whether this was happening. Did it benefit Squirrel Squadron? Did it help you guys learn more about how you can be more effective tech or non-tech executives? No, that's what I should be thinking about, and I didn't do so well at that. On the other hand, something I did earlier today was to put somebody's logo on my website. And that takes seconds, right? That's not a huge effort. In the same way, pulling down on a lever, not a huge effort, not something that we're going to take hours and hours of investment to make happen. So we're doing a small thing and we're getting a big result. And adding a logo to my website, well, it may seem like it doesn't have a big effect. It certainly cumulatively shows people I have lots of clients. I have lots of interesting things to say. I'm someone you should pay attention to. And that builds my brand and builds my business. So my small action may have quite a multiplied effect on the rest of the world. And that's what you're looking for. That's an intervention. Putting a logo on a website takes a small amount of effort, has a large amount of return, and that's what you should be focusing on. So I often see engineers getting very focused. I was literally just talking about this right before getting on here. An engineer who has a tendency to spend hours and hours and hours staying up all night investigating some terrible bug. And this is not the best way for him as an executive now, as a leader of a technical team, to be acting. What I want him to be doing is teaching his team to diagnose the bugs themselves, make sure that they understand where do bugs come from, what's important about them, how can we fix them. And every time he goes and investigates himself, he has more fun, gives him satisfaction. There's an immediate short-term benefit, but he's working at low leverage. And this is one of the most common traps that I see people get into. They think to themselves, oh boy, this feels good. It's what I used to do as an individual contributor. It's what works for me. It doesn't work for the whole business. It's low leverage. It's only affecting one person or one group. So that's your test for whether you're doing something at high leverage or low leverage. Challenge for you is, can you name some examples, as I did, of low and high leverage in your own life? Where are there places where you're, as an executive or as a team member or as a leader, you're saying, I'm going to do X. Actually, the return on investment on X, probably negative. Not going to be making a big exponential improvement as a result of my small effort. If that's not the case, you're doing the wrong thing. Or you might have a different opinion. You might have the opposite result. You might have a great example and you want to boast about it. This is something very high leverage I did recently. I'd love to hear that. So examples in the chat, please. That would help very much. Nigel, good friend, Nigel's coming to the workshop at the end of November on strategy. Glad to have Nigel here, as well as other members of the squadron. Nigel says, when the risk of failure is large, it's much harder to stand by. Now, this is very important. I believe it was Julia on the forum made a very similar point. She said, well, look, it makes sense. And I'm sorry, I get Julia and Julie mixed up. I'm worried I may have the wrong one. Whichever of you is here, I'm glad you're here. I hope you are recording or not. Hope I've got the right one. There's a couple of you. But made the very important point that when you're looking at a P1 bug, something that's bringing down the website, that's stopping people using or paying or doing some other important thing, it's really hard to sit on your hands and you think, oh my God, this could bring down the company. It's going to make people churn and quit and sue us and everything else. And how could I possibly sit on my hands when this is happening? That's exactly the time when you want to consider it carefully. Now, it's the same sort of thing as, if you have a child, and I recognize teams are not children, so I'm not suggesting you treat them like children, but this example is a good one. If you have a child, what you do not allow the child to do is to kind of dangle out a window and 3 stories up and kind of hope they don't fall out. That would not be an appropriate thing to do. But if always you run after the child and grab them as soon as they come anywhere near, say, a curb or the edge of the street, or a small mole hole or hill, something they might trip on. If you grab them every time, they will just learn, well, mom or dad grabs me. That's what stops me. And so what I was worried about for Jules on the forum is that she's training her team to think, well, we can always have these conflicts. We don't have to resolve them. She'll come along and sort them out for us. And I don't think that's a good thing to train the team to do. It won't scale. And it's very low leverage for you, because it requires your immediate action on a specific problem and does not have a kind of multiplicative effect. So what I'd encourage Nigel and Julia and others to do is instead look for places where it's safe, where it's kind of controlled. And no, it's not the P1 bug that's stopping you on, I remember one that came out on Black Friday when an e-commerce company I was in was trying to sell half their stock, half their revenue for the year was coming that day. Is that the day to train the team on their these kind of autonomous and independent actions? No, probably not. But could you be looking for opportunities like that beforehand? So when you get to Black Friday, when you get to the crucial issue, they are in the habit of coming to you with something to be accountable for, where they say, we got this covered, Nigel. We're on this case. We know what's happening. We know it's super important. Here are the 3 things that we're doing to handle this. And you say, oh my God, don't do number 3. That's high leverage, because it gives them the authority, that they get the learning that they are going to need to take action. They aren't going to wait for someone. You aren't training them that someone else will rescue them. But you still have the opportunity to intervene and say, wait, you're not headed the right way. And that second part, that teaching, that norm setting, this is the right way to do it. These are the issues to look out for. That action is tremendously high leverage, because it has an effect all over the place in the whole company. Now, I wasn't going to tell this story, but I'm going to tell it because I like it a lot, and it's a great example of very high leverage action, not in an emergency situation. Actually, the person created an emergency, but I just think it's a great example, and I like telling the story. So my live stream, so I'm going to. This one's about Steve Jobs, not generally a paragon of virtue and someone to follow in all cases, but this example really captures it nicely. He was had just come back to Apple. He was in his office. The team was out building the very first iPod. We hadn't got to the iPad and the iPhone and so on yet. It was just getting songs in your pocket. So it was going to do better than a Walkman, right? And he said, look, we're going to have thousands of songs in your pocket. That's what we're going to build. You guys go build it. And they brought him the very first version. And it was a little box, and it had wires hanging out of it. It was the only one in existence. It was a prototype. But they had proven the technology would work, and they were very proud. And they brought it to Steve Jobs. And they said, Steve, look, this is the first iPod. You can put it in your pocket and get thousands of songs. Isn't it wonderful? And he looked at it, and he turned it upside down, and he looked at it very carefully, and he said, it's too big. They said, Steve, we can't make it any smaller. It does fit in your pocket if you have a big pocket. We really need it. We can't do any better. He said, it's definitely too big. And he walked over to the large aquarium that he had in his office with fish swimming around in it. And he dropped the only iPod in existence, right? There's no other iPod. They haven't got a copy. There's no backup. This is the prototype. He takes it and he drops it into the aquarium, thus ruining it, right? So it's no longer functioning. And he points to it to the whole group that were standing there shocked with their jaws on the floor. And he says, now look, this column of air bubbles that's coming out of this iPod, this prototype you brought me, that shows that there's space in there. And that means you can make it smaller. Don't come back until there are no air bubbles. And he sent them away. Now, the point of this story is that I'm telling you this story, and I never worked at Apple. I never met Steve Jobs. This story was so high leverage that it had an effect on the whole company, that everybody at Apple noticed that, hey, that Steve Jobs guy, he might drop whatever you bring him in the aquarium. So you better make sure it's small. That's important. And you better make sure it's high quality, whatever the thing you're doing. Steve is the kind of crazy person who will tell you that it's not working and drop things in aquariums. So it was such an exciting story that it had this kind of life of its own, and it escaped Apple, and I know it, and I'm telling you. But the point, and so the thing that you can be doing is finding similar small actions, right? Dropping the iPod in the aquarium was a pretty physically easy action, probably mentally required a little bit of strength, but Steve Jobs wasn't too bothered by what people thought of him. So it wasn't high emotional labor either. So it's a relatively small action that had huge ripple effects on decisions people made about hard drives and colors of advertising campaigns and probably 50,000 other things that Steve never ever saw. But people had the sense that the norm at Apple is you're going to do it to this high quality standard. Don't violate Steve's expectations, whatever it was. He got that norm really clearly established by taking that small action. So that's the first thing that I want you to think about is when you're thinking about whether you should take an action, is there an alternative action, as in Julie's case, where I'm saying, and Nigel's, where I'm saying, look, take an action that's different. Instead of intervening, ask them to bring you the issue and intervene if they bring you the wrong action. And that smaller action, almost always going to be a smaller action, one that has less physical effort for you. Can that be higher leverage? Therefore, you're getting more out of the small action that you're taking. That's the heuristic to use when trying to decide about this. Okay, I hope that was helpful, Nigel. I thought that was a very provocative comment, and then we had the forum comment as well. So if any of you want to come back to me on that, argue with me, say that I'm wrong, I would love to hear it. I like to argue. So and productively. Productive conflict is something that I like to do. All right, so let me talk about something else. Some of you may not know how to walk. You might think I've been walking for a long time. I really understand walking, Squirrel. I don't know what you mean by saying I don't know how to walk, but you probably don't know quite what all the factors are in your walking. And for doing that, I recommend that you watch, as I have been doing, a small person of about the age of 1.5 or 2 who's kind of getting used to this idea of walking. And what you notice is that walking is actually controlled falling. So they're called a toddler for a reason, right? They kind of toddle and they lean forward and then they catch themselves with the other foot. And then they lean forward and they catch themselves with the other foot. That's kind of how they get someplace. And it's a kind of a waddling back and forth. There's a lot of wasted effort in moving about. Now, you've managed to kind of hide this. And so as you walk around, I'm sure you don't look like you're toddling and falling and so on. But that's mechanically actually what's happening. And the key thing about that is that seems to work okay. Most people seem to get where they're going when they walk, and they're doing this kind of controlled falling repeatedly all the time. And that's the sort of thing you want to look for in your team. So back to this, related to this notion again of dealing with a risk of failure. Your team might fail, failure might be bad. I claim small amounts of failure administered very frequently are very successful and very helpful. Just like falling forward and then catching yourself is a very good way to get from one place to another. We all use it. You get out of balance and then you get back in balance. Cycling, being on a bicycle, is the same sort of thing. If you want to turn, you actually make yourself fall over to one side, and then you turn the wheel afterwards. That's actually what happens, and you catch yourself and stop yourself falling and then recover. So the best teams that I see are not the ones that never fail. They're the ones that fail very, very often in very small ways. For example, by building pieces of software. I have one team that does 8 or 10 experiments a week. So they're out there trying new stuff with their customers. A lot of those experiments fail. Hallelujah. I always say a experiment is successful even if it has a negative result, right? The negative result in an experiment is a successful experiment because it told you not to do that thing. And so they're repeatedly trying new things with their customers. Do they want the button over here? Would they like to have this kind of price? Would they like to have this third step during their registration process? They're trying these things all the time in small chunks and learning an awful lot very, very quickly. Let me give you just a couple more examples of this idea of failure being a very successful thing to have. It's something that you want to encourage. You want to make sure your team has it. One is that Toyota, when they run their factory, have these things called andon lights. I tried to find an example to use in the tweet for this, but I couldn't find one. But Google andon light, you'll find some pictures. And it's kind of a red and amber and green light, and it's at every station. So all the people who are putting on wheels and tires and wing mirrors and all the different things they're doing to the cars, they all have one of these lights, and it has a pull chain on it, so you can pull on it, and that makes the light go amber or red. So they count the number of andon pulls, and when you pull it, summons someone. If it's amber, then it brings your manager. If it's red, it stops the whole line and everybody comes. So it means that, we only have left-hand wing mirrors. We can't make any more cars because we're out of right-hand wing mirrors. We can't build anymore. And then you have to go solve that problem because it's going to stop the whole line. But you might think that their goal is to have fewer of these. And in some sense it is. They do aim, if they have a whole lot of them, more than usual, they would want to say, well, what's going wrong on the line today is we brought in a new supplier, we running the wrong equipment, what's happening that's causing more andon pulls today. They're interested in that. But they also track whether there are too few. And if there are an abnormally low number of andon light pulls, they might actually stop the whole line and make a kind of red pull and say, hey, everybody, something's wrong here. Either you're not pulling, you're not giving us a signal when something is actually wrong, and that means you should do something different. So we should change that. That's not the norm. We want you to act differently. We want to hear about the problem. Or we're just not running the factory fast enough. We've got so much better by addressing all these problems that came about by people pulling the andon cord that actually we can go faster now. So we're going to make the conveyor belt go faster, send the cars through quicker. And that should bring the number back up. So this is a kind of thinking that you can apply in your technology team. So it was wonderful at one of our first live events for the squadron. We had someone, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, said, yeah, I have a failure budget for my team. I track the number of people who and the number of times the team fails. And the expectation is they'll fail some, right? If they don't spend the failure budget, something kind of signals to me that it's not going as it should. So you can track this as well. How many times is your team actually in a controlled way, right? We're not going to take down the whole nuclear plant and melt down everything or cause some horrible catastrophe that everyone's going to be really injured and not recover from. But man, it sure would be nice if they failed occasionally, if there were some bits of learning that were happening that helped them. So you can track how many of those there are. And just as Toyota does, if there are too few, run things faster, ask them to do more. Say, hey, why don't we skip more estimation sessions? We don't need that backlog grooming. It doesn't seem to be adding a lot. You guys aren't failing enough. Let's see if we can go faster, if we can do more, if we can take a few more risks and therefore learn something more. So those are some heuristics that you might use there. I want to give you just one more example. It's one of my favorite analogies. I was using it in Vienna last week. And that is that there's a way that Elon Musk plans to get to Mars. You might remember he's not only buying Twitter, he's also going to Mars, apparently. Maybe he should stay there. I'm not sure. But he's planning to go to Mars the only way humans know to get to Mars right now, which is to climb into the top of a rocket. And you better bring a lot of books, because when you get in the rocket, you're going to Mars, right? You're not going someplace else. Can't change your mind partway. You can kind of do an extra burn and go a little bit more this way or that way. But changing your course, deciding to do something else, saying you forgot to turn off the iron, no, none of that. You get in the rocket, off you go. And none of us like that. That's not the way that we normally get around in the world. What's much more common for us is to do this kind of, as I was saying in the walking example, to kind of fail a little bit and correct, and fail a little bit and correct, and always be able to correct where you're going. So what I like to say is I wish that we had, and it's certainly what we do have for technology, I wish that we had the Starship Enterprise. Because the Starship Enterprise can go a bit this way and then change its mind. Say, oh yeah, we were going to the moon, but now we're going to go over here. Betazoid 1 is one interesting place, but we've discovered an anomaly in the space-time continuum this way. And any space movie or drama definitely has this characteristic, right? If they only could go one direction, it'd be very boring. You'd be watching that person read a book, Elon Musk sitting in the nose cone of his spaceship. It would not be exciting. And it wouldn't be exciting because no one's learning anything. Nothing is changing. You're just on track. And if that's the way your tech team feels, if your tech team is kind of doing the same thing, cranking it out, they never fail, they're not very fast, and nothing seems to change, and it takes them a long time to get to Mars, you're probably doing it wrong, or at least suboptimally. There's something more that you could be doing. And so the advice here is set yourself a failure budget. Just like Toyota do, as my colleague at the first session was suggesting, have a look at what your team is doing to fail and how they're correcting. Are they able to correct quickly? If you have the fear that, oh boy, this risk of failure is large, something is going to go wrong here, and therefore I can't let the team do this, look at yourself, look at your setup. what could you do to mitigate that fear? Because if you're operating in that fear, you're going to be moving very, very slowly if that's the operating condition that you run under. Okay, I hope I'm being helpful here. I'm not hearing a lot of comments. That's normal sometimes. Not a lot of you have a lot to say. That's okay. But if you have questions, this would be the time to bring them up, because I have about one more topic to cover. And I would love to answer questions instead and get to more of what you have to say. Always fine with me. I'm learning the most here. I'm having a blast. So never an objection from me. But get your questions in now in whatever chat method you're using on any of the platforms. I would love to hear from you. Last thing I'm going to talk about is how you communicate this. So suddenly you're going to tell the team, yeah, by the way, I used to be intervening all the time and jumping in when there was a bug and handling it when your estimates are wrong. And I'm not going to do that anymore. That's going to disappoint them. So your team is not necessarily going to be very happy about that. And this is an example of defining your negative space. So there's very few things I know about art. I've learned most of them from my wife, who is an art historian. But one of the very few things I know is that if you're painting a picture of, say, some flowers, you have nice flowers and a vase and so on, one of the most important things to illustrate is what is not the flowers, what is not the vase, all the things that are in the background. And those actually make shapes, and you can analyze those and learn a lot about how it symbolizes the Republic of Ireland or whatever the topic is. That thus ends my art history knowledge. But what I can tell you is that the negative space of what you're doing is something that's extremely important to communicate. So you'll want to, if you're going to follow my advice here and hurry up to do nothing and to let your team fail more, you better tell them, because if you just let it happen, they will be very confused. However, what they will do is say, we liked it when you intervened. We liked it when you handled problems. Now we're going to be on our own. This is not as good. And you want to disappoint them helpfully. So whenever you're going to disappoint somebody, I always say it's best to make sure that you're communicating to that person where that disappointed is coming from. What's your motivation? They can't read your mind. So what I encourage you to do is to say to them something like this. I've been intervening more, but I think we can take the training wheels off now. I think that you can do more in this area. So you should expect that the next time something goes wrong here, I'm not going to step in. You are responsible, and I'm expecting you to come to me to be accountable for what's happening and to bring the issue to me if I'm needed. It would be great if you could solve it on your own. And the reason I'm doing that is I can act with higher leverage. I can have more effect on more people and give more value to the company. And I will give you opportunities to learn. I'm going to do that in a controlled, safe way. Here are the things I've done to mitigate, and you can describe what steps you've taken. But you want to communicate to them that you're doing it, what the benefits to them are going to be, what the benefits to the company, the organization are going to be. So that's my advice there. I can tell you one example of this, which I wanted to mention. Then I'll close with an idea from the forum. Unless there are questions, I'd love questions. Please argue with me, and people who disagree with me are the most fun on these. So feel free to tell me you see this differently, or you don't think a failure budget would be useful. But I had a great example where a team was trying to figure out one of two very complex technical ways to go. There were two options they were deciding between, and I knew they were holding a meeting on this topic. And I, as the CTO, was busy doing other fun stuff. And they came to me and they said, Squirrel, stop doing that other stuff you're doing, which was probably pretty high leverage. We want you to come and adjudicate this question. They want to do it with library X. They want to do it with library Y. We can't decide. You should decide. You're the CTO. And I said, I'm the least well-informed. I'm the person who knows the least about these two choices. So I don't think that I'm the person who can decide that for you. I think I would make the worst decision possible. So what I want you to do is go back in there and tell everybody that I'm not going to make the decision. They should make the decision. And I trust them to come up with something good. And this created great shock. It was almost as shocking as Steve Jobs dropping the iPod in the aquarium. I didn't have an aquarium handy to drop that person into, or I might have, right, to get the message across. So leave me alone. You should be making this decision. I trust you to make a good one, and it's okay if we fail. Right? This is a place where it's safe. I knew if they chose the wrong library, the company wouldn't go out of business. So this made a deep impression on them. It was tremendous learning. They did make a decision. It was a pretty good decision as it happened, and we built the piece of software successfully. But even if they'd failed, if they'd not built the software successfully, the learning was worth it to me. And you notice that I was very careful to explain my choice. So I explained not only I'm not coming in to make this decision in this meeting room with you, but also why. And that message really underlined the norm I had, which was I'm going to trust you. I expect you to be able to make decisions like this and to be able to recover from them if they turn out not to work out as they should. So I see I have a question, so I'm going to deal with what my friend Roland is bringing to us. SpaceX is an interesting example of using experimentation, iteration, and fast feedback. No question. They're certainly, it compares it to my usual example where NASA moves very slowly. No question whatsoever. They do try generally not to kill the people who are in the SpaceX space capsules, right? So they are careful in the places where it's necessary, but where, for example, it's an unmanned rocket, they're perfectly happy to blow it up. And take a lot more risks than NASA would in trying something, having a failure, and walking away from it. So, Roland, I think that's a great thing to point out. Thank you very much for that. I like that example very much, especially as you say, because it's so different from how NASA functions, where literally the developers might write 100 lines of code per year. Individual developer might write 100 lines of code in a year. That speed would be suicide in any fast-moving business like the ones most of us are in. SpaceX even goes farther in being willing to fail, and I think that's very helpful. So the last thing I just want to mention is that someone on the forum, again, I think it might be the same person, but I always forget, and I apologize if you're here. Ask for credit, I will happily give it. But this person said, I have a failure budget for my team. I'm really trying to figure out in particular how they're defining their negative space. And I want them to be very quick to discard things that are not what we want to do, that are not the things that we're wanting to pursue, to disappoint other people, hopefully. And so this person invented the metric time to know. And I really like that. And that's N-O, not K-N-O-W, but no. So time between when somebody says, hey, could we do this nifty thing? And when the team says no. And the connection here, of course, is that she's not taking that action, right? She's measuring how the team is acting. The team is autonomously taking that action, probably sometimes saying no to things they shouldn't. So making errors and learning from those errors. And her action, the high leverage action, is to measure how long it takes them to say no. And she wants them to make that shorter. So that if they're going to fail, if they're going to say no to the wrong thing, let's do that quickly so that we get it out of our systems and we find out that we should have said yes. But what we don't want to do is be analyzing forever, exactly say NASA might in Roland's example. We don't want to be doing that. We don't want to be slowing ourselves down. That's the norm that she's establishing with her high leverage action. So I was very pleased to see that and thought that was a great idea I would share with you. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I really appreciate the contributions so far and the comments on the forum that gave us some material to start with here. Always very, very welcome. I'm going to throw back up here the Squirrel Squadron link. So that's where you can come along to more of these. We've got the one next week, which is on search engine optimization. We have a super expert on that topic. So if you're wondering, what are those weird people doing who are always working on making us have better Google search or something, but they never tell us what it is, Eli Schwartz is someone who knows all the answers to that. He's going to be with us on another live stream. I believe it's next week. I haven't looked at the calendar, but I think that's right. Have a look on Squirrel Squadron. You'll see more there. I'm live in Miami. I'm the week after that. I'm live in London in early December. I have a workshop coming on strategy that's at the end of November. There's just tons of things happening. Plus, there's the forum, and I forgot to mention we have Secret Squirrel, which is the list of hundreds of very exciting material, news sources, information sources, podcasts, and magazines, and websites, and blogs, and you name it. There's really interesting material there, some of which I've been dipping into, contributed by the members of the Squirrel Squadron. Very much appreciated. Wonderful to see all of you recorded and live and everything else, and hope to see you at further Squirrel Squadron events very soon. Have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone.